Kia ora, Helen Brahms here with May 7th edition of Genealogy and History. Let's see, so where should we start today? We've got some good stuff in here. Like I said, there's something about the Nobel Prizes is in here. There's something about the Royal Theatre. I wish they would stop all these pop-ups on the screen. Makes it very difficult to get into the mood of telling stories, which genealogy is all about telling stories. It's telling those family stories and the things that happened and things that your family that make up part of your past, which help forge the path to the future. Kind of liking that saying, the past that forges the path into the future, or following the past into the future. I like that one. Okay, so what happened on May 7th? Oh my gosh, so much happened. So much. Let's see, we're going from 558 AD to 2012. There's a couple of songs along the way too. So let's get started on this. There are some great things that happened. So again, as we're going through this, think, was there anybody in your family tree that would have been in an area when something happened? And is it possible that they participated in it or maybe witnessed it? Was one of the people that we mentioned today, could they possibly be in your family tree? Could they possibly be in your family tree? I'm sorry, I've got music on the brain right now. So on May 7th, 500. Justine the first immediately. That's that massive building there in what is now in Istanbul, and that was the largest Catholic church for it was very first Catholic church, and it was the largest Catholic church for a very, very long time until it later became a Muslim temple, and then from there it went to becoming the museum that it is today. So very famous building there in Istanbul, which at the time was Constantinople. I'm going to get tongue-tied tonight, I don't know it. In 1616, Isaac B. Fubine of Savoy in The Hague patents macaroni. And I had to go look this up. And yes, it was macaroni as in the pasta. He put a patent on that in 1660, May 7th. So like, really? Yeah, there was quite a few hundred, or was it thousands, of patents for pasta. And that was one of them. In 1663, the Theatre Royal in Drury Lane in London opened. It was the second building on the site. The one prior to that one was the Theatre Royal Bridge Street, and the building on the site today is the fourth theatre to be on that site. It is the oldest theatre site in London that is still in use. So it's had 4 buildings on there. The first one was called Theatre Royal Bridge Street. The other 3 have been called Theatre Royal in Drury Lane. And all I could think when I read that, it immediately pops into my head. Do you know the Muffin Man, the Muffin Man, the Muffin Man? Yes, so that song, when I saw Drury Lane, that song just popped into my head. And I know, bad girl. Having fun today. It's Fun Friday. In 1664, Louis XIV of France inaugurates the palace at Versailles. Have you ever been to there? It's on my list to do. I have not been there, but the photographs of the place look incredible. And I have spoken to people that have been there, and they say just some of the places there are some places that just take your breath away, and that's one of those places. On May 7th, 1700, William Penn began monthly meetings for blacks advocating emancipation. William Penn was an early Quaker and founder of the Province of Pennsylvania, the English North American colony and the future Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. He was an early champion of democracy and religious freedom, notable for his good relations and successful treaties with the Lenape Indians. Under his direction, the city of Philadelphia was planned and developed. So a very interesting man to have known back in the 1700s. On May 7th, 1718, the city of New Orleans was founded by Jean-Baptiste Lemoyne de Bainville. I will get that. I've got to get better on my pronunciations. So happy birthday to the city of New Orleans. Since 1718, so that makes you what? 302 years old? 303 years old. Yeah, because we're 2021, aren't we? Yeah, 303 years old. So happy 303rd birthday to New Orleans. On May 7th, 1789 was the first U.S. presidential inaugural ball for George Washington, and it was held in New York. In 1824, Ludwig van Beethoven's Ninth Choral Symphony, often regarded as his greatest work, premieres in Vienna. Now, I don't know the names of a lot of classical music that I listen to, but I know what I like. And so I had to go and watch YouTube to pull up the what this was. And I'm listening to it and I'm thinking, this sounds really familiar. And then they got to the big finale where the whole choir, there was this massive choir standing in the background that all comes in. And I thought, yeah, this is the song that gives me goosebumps. This is the one that gives me goosebumps down my arms, all over my body. I get that goosebumps and that little shiver go over my body when all of those voices in beautiful synchronicity and harmony just belt out the last portion of this of the symphony. So if you have not heard the Ninth Choral Symphony, please go listen to it, and you're bound to recognize it when you get. The front part is not as well known as the last portion of it is. So yeah, that's part of it, if you could hear that. On this day in 1846, the first printed copies of poems by Emily, Charlotte, and Anne Bronte were received and published under the pseudonym Acton Currer and Alice Bell, and they sold a grand total of 2 copies. On May 7th, 1867, Swedish chemist Alfred Nobel patents dynamite in England, the first of 3 patents he would receive for the explosive material. This was his 5th of the Nobel's 355 patents and his most famous. As a student of chemistry, Nobel had become interested in finding an alternative to the highly unstable nitroglycerine while working in his father's explosive factory. Nobel went on to invent other explosives, including gelignite in 1875, which was more stable than dynamite. In 1895, Nobel used his will to establish prizes for those who during the preceding year have conferred the greatest benefits to humankind. The first Nobel Prize was awarded in 1901. It's always interesting to see where things originated from and how they came about and that sort of thing. Like the Nobel Prize, I remember reading something in his biography years ago when I was in high school about how he was so distraught about how people were using his dynamite, and that was the reason behind him establishing the Nobel Prize, the Peace Prize and things. And that was the whole reason behind it, because he was so disgusted with how people were using the explosives. In 1895, the Russian scientist Alexander Stepanovich Popov demonstrates to the Russian Physical and Chemical Society his invention, the world's first radio receiver in St. Petersburg, and today it's celebrated as Radio Day in Russia. In 1914, May 7th, 1914, U.S. Congress established Mother's Day. So to all of the mother figures, so whether you are a mother, an aunt, a grandmother, a niece, a daughter, if you look after kids in a mother's role, if you take on a mother's role in any way, so all of the mother people out there in roles of mothers, happy Mother's Day this weekend. And even to those that have their pets as well, the dogs, the cats, the birds, whatever it is that you keep as a pet. If you are a mother or in a mothering role, happy Mother's Day on Sunday. In 1915, RMS Lusitania was sunk by a German submarine off the southern coast of Ireland. 1,198 lives were lost. I remember reading this story years ago. And I mean, years ago, I was like a teenager. I had this little book that was about shipping disasters of all things. But what I found interesting about this story was the one that I read that talked about who was on board the ship and some of the things that they did. And I'm going to read this little, well, it's not exactly short, but I'm going to give you the highlights of this. So Alfred Vanderbilt, as in the Vanderbilt family, died a hero on the stage trying to save women and children aboard the liner, the Lusitania, which was sunk by a German U-boat. The ship owned by the Cunard Line, and we all know the Cunard for her queens, the Queen Mary II, the Queen Victoria, and the Queen Elizabeth, and I think that's it for now. Yeah, I think we just got the three. The ship was owned by Cunard and was built to dominate the high lucrative transatlantic passenger trade. Launched in 1906, it was completed the following year as the largest ship in the world, weighing 31,550 tons. Compared to today's cruise ships, that's small. The maiden voyage of the 787-foot or 240-meter long liner took place on September the 7th, 1707, when she sailed from Liverpool in England to New York City. On this day, the ship was reversing that voyage and was heading to the UK from New York with 1,959 passengers and crew on board. But it was the time of the First World War, and Germany, with a formidable fleet of submarines or U-boats, was attempting to stop vital supplies reaching the UK across the Atlantic. Germany had declared the seas around the UK a war zone and warned that the Allied ships in the areas would be sunk without warning. Nobody seriously thought this threat would apply to non-military luxury passenger liners such as the Lusitania, especially as she would be bound to have many neutral Americans on board. But Germany took a different view, and its embassy in the United States had placed a warning in 50 American newspapers, including those in New York, explaining the danger of sailing to the UK. It read, "Notice: travelers intending to embark on the Atlantic voyage are reminded that a state of war exists between Germany and her allies and Great Britain and her allies. That zone of war includes the waters adjacent to the British Isles, that in accordance with the formal notice given by the Imperial German government, vessels flying the flag of Great Britain or any of her allies are liable to destruction in those waters, and that travelers sailing in those war zones on the ships of Great Britain or her allies do so at their own risk." The Imperial German Embassy, Washington, D.C., 22nd of April, 1915. Some New York newspapers had printed the warning directly next to Cunard's list of departure dates, and as the Lusitania got underway, the dock was crowded with reporters. They saw that despite the German threat, the ship was packed with passengers. Clearly, they believed that a luxury liner with no obvious military value would not be a target. Two other factors boosted confidence. First, Cunard had declared the Lusitania to be the fastest and largest steamer now in the Atlantic service. So in the highly unlikely event of threat, as was thought, she could outpace any German vessel and thus escape danger. Secondly, several rich, famous people such as Alfred Vanderbilt and wine merchant John Champion King Kessler had come aboard, inspiring confidence. Obviously, they would have the access to high-level information, warning them if danger really did exist. William Turner, the captain of the Lusitania, known as Bowler Bill because he usually wore a bowler hat when ashore, received advice from the British Admiralty on how to avoid making his ship an easy target. He was urged to alter course every few minutes at irregular intervals, so the evasive tactic of zigzagging would thwart any attempt by U-boats to plot the Lusitania's course. Captain Turner ignored the advice, and on the afternoon of May 7th, just off the headland near Kinsale, County Cork, Ireland, a torpedo fired by a German U-boat exploded amidships on the Lusitania's starboard side. It was followed by a second explosion, possibly caused by damage to the ship's steam engines. 18 minutes later, the Lusitania had disappeared beneath the waves, and 1,198 people, including 128 American civilians, were drowned. Of the 1,959 passengers and crew, only 761 survived. The victims included Alfred Vanderbilt, who during those 18 minutes had performed extraordinary acts of courage. He could not swim, but made no attempt to push through the crowd to get into a lifeboat. Instead, he and his valet calmly helped several women and children to safety. According to reports, a steward saw Vanderbilt vainly attempting to rescue a hysterical woman and shouted to him, "Hurry, Mr. Vanderbilt, it will be too late." Vanderbilt did not listen and continued to help women and children. A report in the New York Times 4 days later told of how a woman passenger overheard the tycoon say to his valet, "Find all the kiddies you can." According to the report, the man rushed off collecting children, and as he brought them to Vanderbilt, the millionaire dashed to the boats with two little ones in his arms at a time. The report added that when he could find no more children, he went to the assistance of the woman and placed as many as he could safely in the boats. He continued his efforts until the very end. Vanderbilt was seen helping a nurse put on a lifebelt before he could finish securing it, they both washed off the deck. The body of the 37-year-old millionaire was never found. President Woodrow Wilson had announced at the start of the war that the United States would remain neutral and was supported by a majority of the American people. But the sinking of the liner and the loss of so many passengers, including those 128 Americans, caused a wave of indignation across the United States, and it was expected that a declaration of war would follow. The government, however, clung to its policy of neutrality, and its reaction to sinking simply amounted to 3 separate notes being sent to Berlin condemning the German submarine war policy. To placate America, the Germans gave an informal assurance to President Wilson that there would be no repeat of the Lusitania incident, and they would end their sink-on-sight policy, and they did so on September the 13th, 1915. So that is just, sorry, it was a little longer than, I read a little further than I had planned to. But that's the story behind the Lusitania. There's very interesting stories about ships and how they sank and why they sank, and those that were attacked, why they were attacked, and that sort of stuff. This was one of the ones that's always fascinated me over the years. Now, back to May 7th, 1928, the United Kingdom. Now remember, in 1914, I think it was 1914 yesterday, and 1915 the day before, they had refused to allow women to vote. So now we're up to 1928, and the United Kingdom lowers the age of women voters from 30 to 21. In 1941, Glenn Miller records Chattanooga Choo Choo for RCA. It becomes the first record to be designated gold. In 1943, Liberty ship George Washington Carver, named after the scientist, was launched. And if you have not heard about George Washington Carver or read anything about him, he was an incredible forward thinker when it came to agriculture. I know for the agriculture, because I didn't even know this guy existed until he turned up in a book I was reading as one of the characters, and it was in The Traveler's Gift, or The Traveler, by Andy Anderson, and about a guy who goes through time talking to people in history to learn more about life today. And one of the people he got to talk with was George Washington Carver, and how he could see that people with the cotton were depleting the minerals and stuff out of the soil. And he also encouraged people to grow peanuts and came up with the various different ways that peanuts could be used. So in 1943, the Liberty ship George Washington Carver was named after the scientists and launched. In 1960, the USSR announces Francis Gary Powers confesses to being a CIA spy. Now, this guy Powers would fly a jet over Russia at a high altitude, taking pictures and films and stuff of what he was seeing, and that stuff was getting taken back to the CIA to be deciphered, decoded, whatever they did, whatever they were doing with it. But he would take that. But he actually got shot down at one point, and he did not have time to hit the self-destruct button. So he kind of got caught a little bit. Yeah. And he was later, they did a hostage exchange with him later, and one of the KGB people were let go. I think it was KGB. That the Americans had a KGB in custody, and so they did a swap with Powers and the KGB. In 1966, the Mamas and the Papas, Monday, oh, hits number 1. I know I'm not the best singer, I apologize. It's number 1. In 1970, The Long and Winding Road becomes the Beatles' last American release. In 1975, U.S. President George Ford declares an end to the Vietnam era. In 1983, August Hoffman performs a record, and this just makes my stomach hurt. August Hoffman performs a record 29,051 consecutive sit-ups. My stomach just cringed at the thought of doing 29,051 consecutive sit-ups. I mean, I can get up to 50. The peak of my fitness, I could do 100 and something, but 29,051, yeah, not this one. But man, his abs must have felt that a few days later. In 1992, U.S. Space Shuttle STS number 49, otherwise known as the Endeavour, had her maiden voyage. She was launched on her maiden voyage. In 1998, Mercedes-Benz buys Chrysler for a US $40 billion and forms Daimler Chrysler in the then largest industrial merger in history. And our last one for today, and this one cracked me up when I read it, which is why I've got it in here, and I've got to test my... All right, let's see if I can get through this, because it's a very long word. In 2012, paleoclimatological research claims dinosaur flatulence may have warmed the Earth. I will let you think about that one. I always remember going on about the cows and their flatulence in the ozone layer back in the 70s or the 80s. They were going on about that. And now they're talking about dinosaurs that may have warmed the Earth. So who in your family tree may have been present at some of the events that were spoken about today? Did you have anybody in your family tree that was on the Lusitania? Were there any of the people that we mentioned today? Are they in your family tree? Either by direct contact or through marriage. Some famous people do end up in your tree through marriage because somebody in the tree may have married somebody in their family, and now you're kind of related by marriage. But anyway, that's it for us for today, for May 7th, for Genealogy and History. Have a super fantastic, sparkling evening. Hei konera.